But it's also thinking about, what do I need to know to be able to help my child move past those old patterns? Or as a coach, what do you need to know to be able to nurture a young sports person to be able to move past some of those traps, some of those loops that they've got playing out where they don't feel good enough? Because you have that ability to have such a positive impact. Do you want to be a more positive role model to your children, to the young people that you coach? Today, we're going to look at the lesson from Graham Arnold as he steps away from the Socceroos role and what you can learn from his journey and the lessons that he's learned. I'm Ian Hawkins, and this is Sport is Life. The purpose of sport, as I see it, is to see your vision become a reality, find your voice, create strong connections, and learn to trust your body. There are patterns from everyone's past that continue to play out. Sometimes they are very beneficial and they lead us to do things that perhaps we never imagined we could. They drive us on when maybe we feel like we can't keep going. But there are other times where those patterns are actually to our detriment. Now, twofold here, look at outgoing Socceroos coach Graham Arnold, specifically around one of those patterns. Now, he leaves at a time where he feels like after 6 years in charge of the Australian national team that he can't squeeze any more juice out of the lemon. And no one can blame him. It's relentless. It's just completely ongoing, a role like that, national team coach. Some incredible results. He took us to the highest finish in a World Cup. I heard him interviewed just this week, and he was talking about, despite the fact that he's had 40 years in the game, he's played for his country, he's had incredible results as a player around the world. He's been involved in, I think it's something like 4 World Cup campaigns, 2 as assistant coach, 2 as a coach. Like I said, incredible results. And really with the Socceroos squad at the moment, better than most people expected that they could have with that particular squad. And yet he still feels like he hasn't achieved anything. Now, why would that be? Now, I'll just read what some of the quotes. He said, the person interviewing him said, "You've done so much for the game." Oh, sorry. He said that people tell him all the time, "You've done so much for the game." And he said, "I feel like I've done nothing. I always feel like there's so much more to do. I feel like I've got so much more to give and I'm never happy with what we've done." And he talked about the World Cup and people said, "Oh, wow, look at all you've achieved." And then he talked about why that would be. And he was talking about his upbringing and just how hard his father was on him. He talked about how his father would be so hard on him after games. He was his coach when he was playing in his regular club team. And he gave the game up. But he talked about how his dad would, when he was between 8 and 14, and I laughed not because it's funny, but because it's disbelief that if he'd played badly, his dad would leave just before the finish and drive home and he'd have to walk his own way home. Can you imagine that at 8? And you imagine that the impact that would have. And then by the time he got home, his dad would be off to the pub and his mum would protect him. And because when his dad had got home from the pub later that evening, she'd tell him to get to bed and get out of sight because he'd come in and he'd still be fired up about how his son had played. Now, you might be thinking, I'm nowhere near that. I don't do anything like that. But there are still patterns. And for the pattern for him is that nothing that he could ever do was good enough for his dad as a coach, let alone as a father. And so the pattern is still playing out, never satisfied. It's one I can relate to. And not because my dad was like that, but there were other needs that I didn't get met. I wasn't getting that validation in other areas in a way that I needed, in a way that all young people needed. So you may have that same sort of feeling that no matter how successful, no matter how well things are going, just never feeling fully satisfied. And then something finishes and you're like, okay, what's next? And like I said, there's a positive element to that because it drives you on and it's never satisfied. It's that relentless pursuit of getting better, of the next project. But it also comes at a cost because you have this inability to stop and pause and recognize what you've done and actually have that level of satisfaction. And that's exhausting. And that's a lot of why you can end up in that state of weariness that's so hard to explain. Just completely exhausted. You can keep going because you've got really good at doing that, at pushing past physically, mentally, emotionally. But it's the weariness that you just need to get to the end of the week or the month and then have a break. Now, as a parent, as a sports coach, it's being so careful with the words that you're using, with how you're delivering it. And you can make such a difference in a young person's life with how you are passing on those messages. And we can get this, well, I say the word wrong, but it's not wrong. We can have conversations that we are best intentions and we think they're completely positive. But if you don't know the psychology of what's playing out, then you're inadvertently having a negative impact. And you can create that same pattern where kids aren't satisfied. I look at the athlete of my two children, or I'll actually take that back because my eldest is now doing some pretty cool stuff around strength and is extremely athletic now, which is cool, although she wouldn't call herself sporty. But my youngest is very much in that he just has such high expectations, which again is great because he gets great results, but he's quite down on himself. And that's not because I was a bad parent, but there were certain things that I've now recognized that have created that pattern. So what do you do about it? Well, the first thing is self-awareness around how you can change that, because you can turn things around and you can still be that positive role model. But it's also thinking about, what do I need to know to be able to help my child move past those old patterns? Or as a coach, what do you need to know to be able to nurture a young sports person to be able to move past some of those traps, some of those loops that they've got playing out where they don't feel good enough? Because you have that ability to have such a positive impact. My older brother, I've mentioned this podcast before, he was that person that always made me feel like I was doing well, that always gave me that self-belief, that said something positive even when I was feeling down on myself. And that left such a positive imprint on my behavior, on my mindset, on my thinking. So if you look again at that experience from Graham Arnold, this is not something that you can be immune from necessarily. It's what can you learn from that? And what he'd learned is that he'd taken himself to the point of exhaustion. And despite the fact that some of the people running the show at Football Australia was sure that he must have had another job, a bit like Ange did when he left the Socceroos post, he was adamant that he hasn't. He goes, I need a break. He goes, I haven't had 6 to 8 weeks off the whole time. Football is continuous. And he's just exhausted and needs a break. Now, I hope he gets time off where he doesn't feel like he needs to be doing stuff. And I hope that he's learned the lesson of this, that, okay, well, maybe I can look at it differently. And if I was coaching him, one of the first things I would do was address that pattern that's happened from that young age, find out what that trapped emotion is, help him move through it, help him move past it, so that that belief that he's never satisfied, that he hasn't done enough, will be a thing of the past. You don't remove the memory, but you remove the pattern. And when you remove the pattern, you're able to change the habit and you're able to create all new positive habits. And when you're able to do that as an adult, you're able to pass on those same skills to either your children, the young people that you coach, or if you teach, or just being that role model of what's possible. So take the lesson, have some self-awareness around, catch yourself where maybe you're saying things that are to someone's detriment, like the mistake I made on the weekend when my child was talking about these different things that were happening that was causing him worry, and I went into fix it mode. Tried to give him the solutions instead of just listening. Still get it wrong. Not perfect, but I was aware of it the moment I said it, and I apologized to him and said, "Oh, mate, I'm sorry. I should just be listening. I'll stop trying to solve these problems for you," because he didn't want me to solve it. He just wanted me to hear and to listen and for him to externalize what was going on. So that's a really good starting point. So first step, identify the patterns, the loops that you're running. And then at this point, don't do anything more than just writing down what you want that to be in the future. The alternative, the positive version. And if you haven't got a journal already, get yourself a journal, because that's where you'll be writing it. And keep all this really good information that you are learning about yourself in that journal, so that when you want to guide someone else, you come back to the journal and it's like your action plan, your game plan for someone else's life. And if you're someone listening to this podcast, easy for you to say, if you're someone listening to this podcast, you're someone that loves to make a difference. You're someone that loves to contribute. You get fulfillment through giving back. So having that journal is going to be such a pivotal part of you doing that. As always, let me know how you go. I love the feedback, and let's keep that conversation going. If you haven't already, jump into the Sport is Life movement with the link there in the show notes, and I'll be sharing more lessons and more wisdom in there, and some special training and some bonus stuff from some of the guests and them sharing their wisdom beyond what they've shared on their individual episode. Speak to you next time. You've taken the time to listen to this whole episode. Now it's time to take action. Commit to one thing you've learned today and make it happen. And to avoid any obstructions, join the Sport is Life movement by clicking on the link in the show notes.